Hello, you're watching BBC News. I'm Anna Foster, live in Beirut with the latest on the developing situation in the Middle East. Let me bring you right up to date with what's been happening here in the last few hours. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has instructed his military to continue fighting with full force against Hezbollah. I'm just looking at a statement here that was released by his office a few hours ago about that ceasefire proposal that was put forward by the UN. Now, he described that as an American and French proposal that he had not yet responded to. But the key is that he said that Israel's military would continue with full force. And of course, that is not what world leaders who were trying to come to some sort of a ceasefire agreement, something to stop these increasing cross-border attacks from continuing. They were hoping to try and have a period of negotiation, a period of just trying to de-escalate. And at the moment, it's very difficult to see whether or not that will be successful. Israel's foreign minister has also said that he doesn't believe there'll be a ceasefire. Some of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition partners in his government have also been speaking out against it. And while that happens, of course, the cross-border attacks on both sides are continuing. I want to show you pictures of what's been happening in the south of Lebanon this morning and here in Beirut, because as those strikes against Hezbollah continue, the Israeli military says it's attacking infrastructure on the border there between Lebanon and Syria. They say that that is infrastructure that's used to transport weapons to the Iranian-backed group. The Lebanese authorities, the Lebanese health ministry are also keeping a running total of the numbers of people who are killed and injured in these various attacks. And they said in the last few hours that in one particular strike, 20 people, almost all of them Syrian refugees here in Lebanon, were killed in an overnight Israeli strike. Hezbollah has also been continuing to fire its weapons into Israel. No casualties or damage reported there in the next few hours. So let's bring you right up to date with what has been happening. I'm going to take you live to Jerusalem, and our correspondent Daniel De Simone is there. Daniel, when we woke up in the region this morning, all the talk from the UN General Assembly in New York was about this hope of a ceasefire that world leaders had been putting together. Just talk us through how that was received in Israel and what various interested parties have been saying in the last few hours.
That's right. So when all this talk was out there this morning, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was actually on a plane to New York, so he wasn't, if you like, available to respond. But his office issued a statement later in the morning, making it clear that he had not actually responded to this proposal yet, and that he was instructing the military to carry on fighting Hezbollah with full force. It is a coalition government here in Israel. There are some far-right members of the coalition who are completely opposed to any kind of ceasefire deal with Hamas relating to Gaza, and are also completely opposed to any kind of ceasefire deal relating to Hezbollah. We've had the security minister and the finance minister both coming out this morning saying they're completely against it. I think calling into question whether they would remain part of the coalition were there to be any sort of ceasefire deal, saying that they need to keep targeting Hezbollah while they feel Hezbollah are on the back foot.
The timing of all of this is, I think, notable as well, isn't it, Daniel? Because for so many months, the concerns were that this type of escalation would come from a miscalculation from one side or another, an attack that ended up killing a large number of people. But actually, it was provoked by those explosions of Hezbollah pages and walkie-talkies here in Lebanon, something, the timing of which, even though Israel, of course, hasn't admitted to doing it, was clearly, it would appear, orchestrated by them. And they have chosen that timing.
Well, it was at the beginning of last week that Israel formally fixed this war goal of theirs that relates to returning 60,000 people in the north of Israel home who have been displaced by Hezbollah rocket fire. And it was really only a few hours after that was fixed that we saw the pager explosions, the next day the walkie-talkie explosions, and then we saw airstrikes in Beirut, one today, and that's the fourth in little over a week, well, just actually less than a week. And of course, we've seen these very, very extensive airstrikes in Lebanon, killing hundreds of people. So this has all come one thing after another, and we've also seen a clear change in rhetoric, the military leadership, political leadership, talking about that only military action appears to be able to deliver the goal that they've set for themselves. They seem to, at the moment, seem to be ruling out any kind of diplomatic solution, at least from what they're saying. That's what they're saying publicly. and there's obviously been talk, including from yesterday, from the head of the military, about a possible ground incursion into Lebanon.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel De Simone, our correspondent there in Jerusalem with the latest. Well, joining me here in Beirut is Hugo Beshega, our Middle East correspondent. Hugo, just talk us through, first of all, what's been happening today and in the last few hours, another strike here in Beirut.
Yeah, so here again, which is Hezbollah's stronghold here in southern Beirut, was hit. Apparently another targeted assassination by the Israeli military. Reports in Israel say that the target of this operation was the commander responsible for the drone operations, Hezbollah's drone operations. And the health authorities here in Lebanon are saying that at least 4 people were killed in this attack. So again, another attack targeting Beirut, targeting Hezbollah's stronghold here in the capital. And we're seeing that there have been more airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes targeting the south, also the eastern Bekaa Valley, which are 2 Hezbollah strongholds here in the country. So indications that the Israelis are not really interested perhaps or preparing for any kind of de-escalation in this conflict.
And we're going to see the scene of that strike in just a moment. I've just been down there to see what's happening. But Hugo, talk us through, because it is really complex what's happening here, isn't it? Obviously, you're based in Lebanon. You're covering this story all the time, but these negotiations that are going on, we heard from the Lebanese Prime Minister this morning with his hopes for a ceasefire, but it's complex, isn't it?
It really is. And I mean, what people say here, and especially people outside, Hezbollah's base of support, is that they fear that Hezbollah is dragging Lebanon into a conflict that is not in the country's interest. And Hezbollah, obviously supported by Iran, they say they are supporting Palestinians in Gaza with these attacks, that these attacks are going to continue until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. And we know that all negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza have failed to reach a deal. So it's very difficult right now to see how Hezbollah can detach itself from the situation in Gaza. There was the hope that a deal in Gaza could help de-escalate tensions here along the border. And on the Israeli side, they say that this situation is unsustainable, unacceptable. No country would accept this situation where 60,000 residents have had to flee their homes because of these rockets being fired from the other side of the border. So there is the real concern here in Lebanon that this could be the beginning of a wider Israeli offensive, and that the Israelis are planning a ground incursion into southern Lebanon to try to create this so-called buffer zone to destroy the infrastructure that has been used by Hezbollah and to push Hezbollah away from the border.
Hugo, thank you. Hugo Beshega, our Middle East correspondent with me in Beirut. So I mentioned I've just been to the other side of the city, the southern suburbs that Hugo was talking about there, where the IDF say they've carried out a precision strike. It's less than an hour since this airstrike was reported in Dahir in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And I just want to show you can see there, this is an apartment on the second floor, and you can really see the damage that's been caused. Now, the IDF have described this as a precision strike. When they carry out these operations in the southern suburbs, they're normally targeting the senior leadership of Hezbollah, some of the senior commanders in this area. Just a few days ago, they killed Hezbollah's head of its missile and rocket program. Now, we know that they've been carrying out strikes, and you can just also see as well the aftermath of a moment like this. You can see members of Hezbollah in the street, but you can also see that the army are here. You can hear the sound of sirens and ambulances that are arriving as well. And I just want to show you in this direction too. If you just come around, and you can see really the chaos in the streets here as people try to work out what has happened, as people try and work out who has been targeted. And of course, it really impacts the civilians who live in this area, their safety and security as well, when they see something like this happening very close to them. Well, that's what's happening just a few kilometres away from me. That's the scene in the southern suburbs of Beirut at the moment. Suggestions that Israel were targeting the head of Hezbollah's air unit. So we'll keep an eye on that developing part of the story for you. But also, as we were saying, these discussions of a ceasefire that have come from the UN in New York. Sumi Somaskanda has been there covering this story for the last few days. Sumi, it's good to talk to you again. When we woke up here this morning, the suggestion that a ceasefire deal might be achieved seemed very strong. The response through the day has been more muted. What are people saying about it there now?
Very little so far, Anna. It's interesting. Again, we're seeing this dichotomy between what you're witnessing on the ground there in Lebanon, the fact that, of course, Israel has said that it will continue to strike Hezbollah targets, and the notes of diplomacy that we have seen here. So those wheels of diplomacy turning quickly on Wednesday surrounding that UN Security Council meeting and that statement that was put out by the US, the UK, the EU, 12 allies supporting the call for a 21-day ceasefire, and a pause that was meant to aid a path towards diplomacy, this off-ramp that we keep hearing about. Well, of course, since Israel has said that they will continue striking those targets in Lebanon, we have not heard from the US here today. Now, there are high-level meetings taking place through the course of the day. The UN Security Council is holding a high-level informal meeting with the League of Arab States. So we're going to be watching to see if anything comes out of that. We understand that they will be discussing UNRWA, their role, the aid organization's role in Gaza, and also a two-state solution. We're also going to be watching because Palestine is going to be speaking, delivering their address to the delegates here at the UN to see what response we hear from them, also from Lebanon. But the big question is going to be, Anna, as you know, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now arriving in New York. We don't know if he's touched down just yet, but he will be here soon. He is expected to speak tomorrow morning. Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, is here. As you know well, he has been traveling throughout the region in the Middle East, trying to reach a ceasefire agreement for the war in Gaza. It is likely that we're going to see continuous diplomatic efforts through the course of the day. But so far, I know what I can tell you from here is we haven't seen any movement today so far.
Subi, thank you for the update. Thank you for keeping across that part of the story for us. Also want to talk a little bit more about the impact that it's having on civilians here in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, and particularly in the south where these continuing airstrikes are going on. We can speak to Etty Higgins, who's UNICEF's deputy representative here in Lebanon. Etty, thank you for joining us here on BBC News. We've spoken before about the difficult situation here for children in Lebanon. What is happening to them at the moment with so many families, as we're seeing, having to flee their homes?
Well, Anna, as your report just highlighted, and as you witnessed yourself in Dahia in the recent hours, the civilians really are in a very, very, very difficult situation right across Lebanon, as we've faced such a massive increase in barrages and airstrikes and fighting this week. We have witnessed here at UNICEF, we're dealing firsthand and witnessing thousands upon thousands of children who are arriving to seek safety anywhere they can across the country. So they're arriving into Beirut, into Saida, into mountain villages, into Akkar, into informal tended settlements, anywhere that they can get some protection and safety. That's where their families are bringing them. And in many cases, UNICEF and the other frontline workers here are finding the children and their families left with nothing. They only left with the clothes on their backs. And they're in huge, huge dire need. We have been on the ground over the last 4 days since the influx started, delivering drinking water, winter clothing kits, blankets, mattresses, absolutely everything, food. It's all desperately needed. And unfortunately, many children, in fact, didn't even were not able to flee on time. And we saw on Monday a huge death toll of children, 36 children in one day who were killed. While this week alone, we've seen over 50 children killed, and we're expecting that number to rise, given that many families are still under the rubble.
And Etty, Lebanon's infrastructure was already suffering from a whole succession of crises that have happened here over the last few years. They weren't at full strength anyway. Is there enough just in terms of hospital capacity, in terms of some of those things that you're trying to consider, food, water, medical treatment? You know, Lebanon was not in a strong place already. Is there enough here to cope?
Indeed, right across basic social services that every child has a right to. Unfortunately, Lebanon has already been in a very difficult situation given the complex economic and political crisis over the last number of years. For today, Anna, what I can tell you is that we are extremely, extremely concerned about the water situation across Lebanon. Unfortunately, this morning there was more barrage and airstrikes on key water infrastructure in parts of Lebanon, which has put those water pumping stations completely out of action, cutting off safe drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people. In addition, this week we are also seeing increased need for electricity because the country is facing another blackout. So UNICEF is delivering fuel supplies across the country to keep water going. But this is a huge challenge because our suppliers and fuel suppliers are telling us that the roads are not safe and that they're very afraid of delivering essential supplies that are required for these populations.
Etty Higgins, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. UNICEF's Deputy Representative here in Lebanon. Much more to come then on this developing story, not just from the region, but from Sumi in New York at the UN General Assembly as well. For now, Anita, it's back to you.